Okay, so let's take a moment to focus again on probation, right? So when we are focusing on probation as a sentence, right? So what we're really transforming and what is seen as maybe like a good thing out of this is that when we have this kind of probation, we are basically saying that you are going to do your penance in the community. So it's going to have like this community supervision aspect. So rather than putting you in jail and having you stay for an extended period of time, for years perhaps, we're going to let you do it at home. So, right, so we're doing punishment at home. So, as like if you've known some people who've been on probation, or you're familiar with like a collective kind of thing, right? Typically, what ends up happening, we don't view this as harsh. It's not viewed as like, oh my God, well, they really laid down the hammer on him. Not viewed as harsh. They really, sock it to me. Like, there's none of that kind of perspective, right? In some cases, right, it's seen as like an easy punishment. So when we compare it to like a prison sentence or, something like the death penalty, right? We are trading on perceived harshness. Because we know if we send someone to prison, right, most people are going to be like, oh, man, pretty rough, pretty bad. How could you do this kind of thing? It's not seen as like great, right? So society makes this trade then, right, by saying, okay, so instead of you going to prison, we're going to have you do this other thing, and we're going to have you do it in community supervision, right? So it's important to, discuss like, why is this done? So, our first kind of reason that we, pick into, right, is from a government perspective, right? Like this is less expensive, for sure, because if you send someone into prison, you have to pay for their food, you have to pay for their healthcare, clothing, all the security measures that are put into place behind that. You take ownership of them. There's potential lawsuits to consider, and it kind of gets to be an issue, right? Because if things are less expensive, and like things like that, it's better for the government, right? And this is especially important if you have a society or government that is intent on punishing people, right? So if you want to use the criminal justice system to impact lives, American society, relative to other Western nations and relative to others, is one of these places, right? So there's something that is, kind of be serious, right? So there's a trade. We realize that we have like this addiction to punishment and incarcerating people. So we have to trade off because we can't necessarily afford doing that, right? So we'll set aside the like moral aspect of whether or not this is the right thing, but there is like a very practical financial aspect to consider. The other part, right, is that if we think about if you do your penance, which is one way to view punishment. So if you do your penance in a community setting, there are some advantages, right, to doing that outside of the cost thing. And so we'll focus on like the offender, right? So if we put advantages to offender. Now, maybe like in our gut, right, we don't really say like, why would we want to do something that's beneficial to the offender? Why would we even want to do this, right? If they've harmed society, why do we want to help them or hurt them? Like, shouldn't we make them feel pain? That, of course, depends on your philosophy with respect to punishment, right? So one thing that is important, right, is that we're using probation, right? We're really leaning into rehabilitation, where we want to see people who make mistakes or have a history of making a lot of mistakes, maybe a lot of them, right? Where we want them to get, quote, fixed, right? So we're really leaning into a rehabilitation kind of side of this, right? So we recognize, right, that sometimes people mess up. They mess up kind of a lot, or maybe they kind of mess up a little bit, but so on, right? But we want to give a second chance. There's something in society that we love about the idea of giving someone a second chance, right? Because we have like this romanticized notion that giving people second chances and then following through is like a really great and wonderful thing. We kind of love hearing those, like, wow, we went against our judgment and you proved us wrong. Wonderful that you did this, right? So we really like that idea, right? But the other part that comes in is that, while you're out, right, you're not just like, hey, you've been fined, right? You have the opportunity to participate in programs, right? So something, that you cannot necessarily do like in prison, right? Because you're in prison and, you're probably not as engaged. You probably have a long time to think about, do you really want to participate? And so we'll cover this in a moment with a real life example from my life, right? Where like you can participate in this program and possibly like heal, right? You can also, like, if you think about going to prison, right? You are shipped away. They don't tell you what time you're being shipped away because they want to prevent like escape attempts for people who are going to prison, right? And you lose ties to your family. So if your partner or your children or other family members, friends, when you go to prison, right, there's miles, there's a cost. Like if you have to call into a prison, there's costs of shipping. Your letters are censored, phone calls are monitored and stuff. So you lose like a lot in human connection when that happens. So by staying in the community, you're able to maintain your ties and connections. You can stay employed, so you don't have like a gap in like your employment history. So you can still hang out and possibly be around, exposed to pro-social people. Because if you're in prison, right, chances are you're probably against a lot of people who did some nasty kind of stuff and maybe aren't like the best influence on your life, especially when we don't want you to offend again, right? That's ultimately what we want. So, if you are exposed to that kind of pro-social behavior in people, then that's something that is useful, right? So if this is all going to be in place, right, we still have some rules and conditions, right? And so first, right, is that you have to like meet terms of probation. These are negotiated between you and the court, and they make a decision about what is going to be best for you, or what they believe to be the best for you, what kind of treatment plans, what kind of restitution you have to pay, how long you have to be supervised, right? And this is meant to, it is intended to set a path for success and repair some bullshit. The other part, right, is that even though you're out in the community and you have terms of like your probation that you need to meet, right, there's also like this hanging threat that this could get revoked. And you can end up in prison. So, your first pass through, you end up getting probation, so maybe don't be as bad. But you also know that if your probation gets revoked due to violating some sort of, condition of parole or something like that, that you'll end up in prison anyway. That's something that is used as like a stick to prevent it, and the carrot is you get to stay home and do time in a different way. Okay, so we'll pause here and then we'll continue in the next video.